Thanks for listening to the video, guys. This is another episode of What's Next. We're looking at what's next for Sarah Kaufman. This is going to be a tough and brutally honest episode of What's Next. Currently, Sarah Kaufman is the bantamweight champion over at Invicta FC. She fought last in May of this year, and currently she is itching for a fight. She's really looking for a fight. She's sniffing for a fight. She's been on Twitter and everywhere else talking about how she can't get a fight. Nobody wants to fight her. How could they book the atomweights that are coming up? You know, she's been online asking for fights left and right. She's been asking for fights all over town. You know, she has basically said, you know, somebody needs to call her out in Invicta. Does anybody want the belt? Somebody call me out. Let's book a fight. She's even out here hating on the atomweights that are main eventing the next Invicta card in December. You know, she's been saying a lot. She also said that she would fight Chris Cyborg just to get back in the UFC. She desperately does want to get back into the UFC. That's for sure. That's for sure. What I'll say about this is, you know, Sarah Kaufman, it just doesn't look like she's going to make it back in the UFC. It really doesn't. It does not at all look like she's going to make it back in the UFC. It doesn't look like Dana White and the brass is even interested. I don't think they're interested in building the bantamweight division very much because they already have a fresh batch of featherweights that are going to go down to bantamweight once the tough season is over. Sarah Kaufman desperately wants to get back into the UFC, but let's talk about her UFC record. Her UFC record is 1 win, 2 losses, 1 no contest. That's her UFC record. She had 4 fights. She had won 1 of them. Now, even though she had only won 1 fight, I personally didn't think that she should have gotten cut. I thought it was just too soon for somebody with such a name. You know, Kaufman, I think she just had a little bit of butterflies or something, but, you know, they cut her. What are you going to do? They let her go. So that happened. You know, she got cut from the UFC. Since being cut from the UFC, she has managed to string together 3 wins. She beat Jessie. And now this is where it's going to get brutally honest, okay? She went over to Invicta. Actually, first she went to Korea and she fought a fighter named Jessie Rose Clark. We all know Jessie Rose Clark. She beat Jessie. She beat Jessica Rose Clark. And now Jessica Rose Clark is in the UFC. Okay, Jessica Rose Clark is now in the UFC after losing to Sarah Kaufman. So then Sarah Kaufman goes on to her next fight. She fights Pannie Kianzad. She beats Pannie Kianzad, and after that fight, Pannie Kianzad goes on to be on the Tough show. Right? She's on Tough now. So I would say that's a step up. I would say that's definitely a step up from Invicta to Tough. That is generally the trajectory that you're looking at. Either you're going to go to Tough or you're going to go straight into the UFC. But Pannie Kianzad's in the UFC, in Tough. She's on Tough right now. After Sarah Kaufman beat Pannie Kianzad, she then went on to fight for the Bantamweight Invicta FC Bantamweight Championship belt. She fought for that belt, and she fought Katarina Lehner. She beat Katarina Lehner. She picked up that strap. And then after Katarina Lehner lost to Sarah Kaufman, Katarina Lehner she is now also on Tough. So if you fight one fighter, they go to the UFC, and then you fight your next 2 fighters go on Tough, you are a gatekeeper. You are a gatekeeper. You are the test. But the strange thing is you don't have to pass the test to get ahead. I don't think the UFC is going to sign Sarah Kaufman. She's the gatekeeper, but even losing to Sarah Kaufman gets you a step further in the game. All anybody has to do is just fight you. They don't even have to beat you. And it looks like they move on to bigger and better things. Here's what's next for Sarah Kaufman. Stop complaining online saying that nobody wants to fight you. Nobody is responsible for your destiny except for you. Stop doing that. People actually are not being, it's not making people like you more. It's not making people want to go to bat for you. None of that. The only thing that it is doing is making people question your record. What's next for Sarah Kaufman? If Sarah Kaufman really wants to put her career into her own hands, her fighting career into her own hands, she needs to start calling out one fighter and one fighter only. And it'll be a leap. It'll be a jump. And it's going to be strange as hell, but I will explain it. She needs to call out Julia Budd. That's who she needs to call out. Julia Budd. Start clapping at her on Twitter. Start calling her out on Twitter. Trust me, Coker is listening. He keeps his ear to the streets. Coker will hear that and you will get signed to Bellator, where there is new life at Bellator. Other promotions are starting to have success out here in the world. It's not just the UFC anymore. PFL. The PFL is doing their thing. $1 Million tournament. They're marketing something new. PFL has a 155-pound women's division. They're marketing something new. One Championship just signed Demetrius Johnson. They basically picked Demetrius Johnson up off of the UFC. He was a signed fighter for the top brass. And One Championship was able to pick him up. That's because the competition is getting so stiff out here. It really is. They're willing to do whatever it takes to be able to compete with the bigger team, which is the UFC. Bellator has the welterweight tournament going on. Bellator is also wrapping up the heavyweight tournament. More eyes are on Bellator. Bellator has Aaron Pico, the shining light of Bellator right now. They also have Dylan Dennis, some people would call him the shining light. Some people would call him the dumbass. Some people would call him, I would call him the non-fighter at the moment because he needs to book a fight. And I'm not, that fight against Khabib didn't count. Getting your head jumped on doesn't count at all. But, they've got good fighters over there. They've got big names over there. She needs to call out Julia Budd, say that you're moving up. I'm going up to 145 to fight for that Bellator featherweight strap. That would be something that people are interested in. But hearing you just keep on complaining about not being in the UFC and not getting fights in Invicta FC, all that says is that they don't want you. They don't want to sign you. If the UFC doesn't want to sign you, it doesn't make any sense to stick around in Invicta FC. I'm just going to be honest. It doesn't. Go to something a little bit bigger, which right now it's Bellator. Go to Bellator. Step up. You are willing to move up to featherweight to fight Chris Cyborg. Julia Budd is a much easier fight. I'm sure you wouldn't mind moving up to 145 pounds to fight Julia Budd. People would be excited to see it. It would be an old school matchup. Why hadn't, the fact that Sarah Kaufman hadn't even fought Julia Budd before, that's kind of interesting. That's a fight that probably should have happened somewhere down the road back at Strikeforce. Now I understand they weren't doing Strikeforce that long. They weren't fighting there that long, but Sarah Kaufman definitely was fighting at Strikeforce for a long time. It wasn't until Ronda Rousey came through and, those last couple of fights, Ronda Rousey came through, took the belt, picked the belt up off of her. I can't remember who she picked the belt up off of. Who had the belt? I can't remember who had the belt. But it was just Sarah Kaufman. That name is the name that you think about when you think about Strikeforce Women's Bantamweight Championships. When you think about the Strikeforce Women's Bantamweight division, you think about Sarah Kaufman. Make it a little mini super fight. Say you're moving up in weight. Call out Julia Budd. Put your career in your own hands. You're the gatekeeper. But the bad part is they don't even have to beat you to get through the gate. They don't have to beat you to get through the gate. Is the UFC calling you right now? Let us know. Let us know. But don't hate on Mina Grisander and Jenny Frey. Don't hate on them right now. The atomweight division is doing things. The atomweight division is something that's new. It should be the main event. You should not be the main event if nobody wants to fight you. And it's a shame. If nobody wants to fight you over at Invicta FC to get the belt, it makes the belt illegitimate. It really does. It makes it like an illegitimate belt. It really makes it feel like that. Also, you beat a bunch of people and they moved up in their career. It's time for you to take your own career into your own hands. I'm not sure what happened with the UFC. Apparently, there was some sort of bad fallout. That's what I keep hearing, that there was a bad fallout in terms of wanting to negotiate and things like that. And, you can't negotiate off a losing streak. It's just not going to happen unless you want to negotiate your salary down. Then you cannot negotiate off of a losing streak. So I feel bad for Sarah Kaufman. I get it. She's one of those that should have been in the UFC. All the other Strikeforce fighters are still in the UFC. All the other big Strikeforce fighters are still in the UFC, and she's not. She really isn't. She should be fighting for a top promotion. And if you can't get the UFC, you need to go to Bellator. They're doing good things over there. You'd get a fight with Julia Budd, no problem. Anyways, guys, that's my take on what's next for Sarah Kaufman. Call out Julia Budd, man. Take your career into your own hands. Channel the fight. Channel your life. Channel MMA.